Before America sent soldiers to Europe, it sent money, billions of dollars quietly crossing the Atlantic long before any American uniform set foot on the battlefield. By the time the first U.S. troops landed in France, Wall Street had already taken sides. The Allies weren't just fighting Germany, they were fighting to stay solvent. And America's banks were too deeply invested to let them lose. Welcome to Money Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. When the guns of August 1914 thundered across Europe, the United States declared neutrality. President Woodrow Wilson promised that America would remain impartial in both thought and deed. But neutrality is a privilege reserved for nations without business interests, and America had plenty. Britain's Royal Navy ruled the seas, Germany was blockaded, and global trade routes were rewritten overnight. Amid the chaos, America found itself at the center of a new economic order. For Wall Street, this upheaval was an opportunity. European powers were desperate for supplies: steel, oil, grain, munitions, and only one neutral economy was vast enough to provide them: the United States. By 1915, American factories were running day and night, producing not for peace but for war. At the heart of it all stood one man, J.P. Morgan, Jr. After his father's death in 1913, he inherited the most powerful private banking empire in the world. Morgan positioned his firm as the financial lifeline of the Allied cause. Britain appointed him as its official purchasing agent in America, and France soon followed. He coordinated billions in orders, from locomotives to bullets, collecting commissions on every deal. In theory, the U.S. remained neutral. In practice, its economy became the engine of the Allied war machine. But by late 1915, the Allies were running out of money. Britain's gold reserves were nearly depleted. Shipments of bullion crossed the Atlantic under armed guard, an empire's treasure in transit. When the gold was gone, Morgan offered credit. In 1915, he organized a record-breaking $500 million loan, backed by a syndicate of Wall Street banks. Within 2 years, those loans exceeded $2 billion, double the size of the entire U.S. federal budget at the time. If Britain or France lost, those debts would vanish, and Wall Street would collapse with them. President Wilson knew it. His Treasury Secretary knew it. Every economist in Washington could see it in the numbers. Neutrality was no longer possible. America's financial fate was tied to the Allies' victory. Yet, to the public, it was still Europe's war. Americans wanted no part of it. Wilson had even won re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." But behind closed doors, the money told a different story. Allied credit was crumbling, and Congress began questioning whether private banks were dragging the nation toward conflict. Morgan hid new loans inside trade contracts, routed funds through South America and Canada, and disguised credit as commerce. Then came the breaking point. In early 1917, Britain warned that without new financing, it would default, an event that would destroy Wall Street. As Morgan's representatives told Treasury officials, "If Britain falls, we fall." Soon after, the perfect pretext arrived. In May 1915, a German U-boat sank the Lusitania, killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. Outrage filled the newspapers. Germany claimed the ship was carrying ammunition. Decades later, divers confirmed it was true. But in 1915, no one cared. Public anger turned against Germany. Still, Wilson resisted war. America was booming, banks were thriving, and there was no reason to risk it all, unless not fighting became riskier. That moment came in early 1917. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, threatening American trade, and the infamous Zimmermann telegram surfaced, a German proposal urging Mexico to join the war in exchange for U.S. territory. The outrage was unstoppable. In April 1917, Wilson stood before Congress and declared war on Germany. His words were noble. The world must be made safe for democracy. But behind the rhetoric lay another truth. The world had to be made safe for American credit. Within weeks, the U.S. government converted Wall Street's private loans into national debt. The Liberty Bond campaigns urged citizens to support the troops, but in reality, they refinanced Morgan's obligations, now backed by taxpayers. Ordinary Americans became lenders to their own government. Over the course of the war, $20 billion was raised, 10 times the size of the original private loans. The financial risk had been nationalized, and Wall Street had wrapped it in patriotism. The war economy exploded. Factories hired millions, profits surged, and America's GDP doubled. When the war ended in 1918, the U.S. emerged as the world's largest creditor nation. Europe's old empires were drowning in debt owed to America. The global balance of power had shifted from London to New York. At the center of this transformation stood a new institution, the Federal Reserve. Created in 1913, just before the war, it was born from the panic of 1907, when J.P. Morgan himself had orchestrated a private rescue of the financial system. The Fed was meant to prevent such dependence on individual fortunes, to manage liquidity, interest rates, and stability. But during the war, it became much more. The Fed coordinated Liberty Bond sales, stabilized Treasury borrowing, and managed inflation. It wasn't just regulating money, it was governing it. When the guns fell silent, America had rewritten the economic map. The dollar began replacing the pound as the world's reserve currency. The institutions that once answered to London now bowed to Wall Street. But victory carried a hidden price. The boundary between democracy and finance had blurred. The war that was supposed to end all wars revealed something deeper. Wars could be monetized, managed, and repeated. In the 1920s, Wall Street extended credit across Europe to sustain a fragile peace. When the Great Depression struck, those debts collapsed, dragging the world into crisis once more. And when World War II erupted, the pattern returned. Banks financed the fight, the government absorbed the debt, and the dollar emerged stronger. Some dismiss the idea that America entered World War I to save its bankers. But look at the ledgers, not the speeches. By 1917, America's financial survival depended on an Allied victory. Neutrality meant economic disaster. War meant liquidity. No secret cabal made the decision. It was simpler and far more powerful. Once money defines the system, morality becomes the language of justification. Ideals become tools to balance the books. Wilson could speak sincerely of democracy while the Treasury absorbed private debt. Bankers could fund wars and charities alike, shaping a new global order where finance wasn't just a tool of power, it was power. The legacy of 1917 endures. Wars today are justified by ideals, freedom, security, human rights. but financed by interests. Modern empires no longer conquer land, they control credit. A century ago, the United States discovered the true battlefield of power, not geography, but liquidity. So, did America enter World War I to save democracy or to save its bankers? Perhaps both. But history leaves one conclusion clearly written in its ledgers. The war made America rich. It made Wall Street global. It turned private capital into public power, and debt into destiny. America didn't conquer Europe. It inherited it, balance sheet by balance sheet. When nations fight for ideals, bankers fight for balance. Flags change, ledgers endure. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.